The U.S. Central Bank took a giant step in September. Accordingly, the giant step was carried out 3 times in a row to raise the base rate by 0.75 percentage points at the time. The Fed can even carry out a giant step or even an ultra step in November. An ultra step is a 1 percentage points increase. In the aftermath of the U.S. high-strength austerity policy, which shows its will to control inflation with a steep rate hike, global countries are also implementing or planning strong interest rate hikes, raising the alarm of global recession. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell has set an inflation target of 2%. He also acknowledged the possibility of a future recession. Chairman Powell raised the benchmark interest rate by 75 basis points on September 21st local time, stressing that we will not consider rate cut until we are convinced that inflation is heading down towards its 2% target. If we raise the inflation target to 3%, the current inflation rate of over 8% will reach that level at the end of next year or early next year, he said. There is no reason to raise interest rates significantly now, but I did not dare to raise the interest rate by re-emphasizing the 2% inflation target, he said. The United States is almost the only country in the world that can export inflation. The austerity policy of the U.S. raising interest rates raises the exchange rate of each country, which leads to an increase in import prices of raw materials and raw materials, further fueling domestic inflation. Countries are forced to raise interest rates in response to the soaring inflation, which leads to a contraction in consumption and investment, which ultimately leads to an economic recession. When the economy starts to fall, stock prices and asset prices fall, increasing demand for the dollar, which is a relatively safe asset, and accelerating capital outflows. At the same time, the exchange rate goes higher and higher, falling into a vicious cycle. The $1 exchange rate is breaking new highs every day. The dollar index, which shows the value of the dollar compared to the weighted average of the world's 6 countries according to the size of the economy, shows the highest value in the past 20 years. Not only small and medium-sized enterprises, which are difficult to hedge against foreign exchange rates, but also large corporations are expected to incur huge losses. It seems that it will not be easy to seize momentum for a rebound in the economy next year amidst each country's competitive giant step policies. A long and distant tunnel of low growth and high prices is beginning. Some say that the U.S. rate hike is intended to subdue Russia. For inflation to fall to 2%, Russia must surrender. In order to get along well with Russia, which is raising energy prices for its own benefit. The Fed needs to raise the inflation rate to about 3%, higher than the 2% target it has always set. Actually, that's not it. The US could also pressure China not to challenge China for hegemony in the name of security by combining its alliance with its allies over the next 8 years until its country is overtaken by China. If a situation arises in Taiwan, there may be a capital outflow. The fetched goal of raising interest rates to contain aggregate demand can only be achieved when the U.S. stock and real estate markets calm down. In the foreign exchange market, the U.S. interest rate hike is not a problem, but an energy problem. The king dollar and the weakening of the won phenomenon caused by interest rate hikes are also related to energy. Looking at the effective exchange rates of the 20 major countries with strong currencies are Russia, Mexico, Brazil, Indonesia, and the United States. They all have energy and resources. India and China, whose currency values are neither too weak nor strong, maintain close relations with resource-rich countries. On the other hand, South Korea, Argentina, Turkey, Japan, and Europe, where currencies are weak, have no energy and are not close to resource-rich countries, so they have no choice but to rely on the United States. The Fed is trying to break the cartels of oil-producing countries, such as Russia and OPEC Plus, by intentionally accommodating the economic downturn by raising interest rates to reducing energy demand. In the Reagan era, then Fed Chairman Volcker raised the interest rates to the 20% level, breaking the oil-producing cartel. Powell is also trying to cut demand until the OPEC Plus cartels collapses. Russia and oil-producing countries are monopolies, and reducing demand is a weapon for the Fed to fight them. If the temperature is mild this winter and there is not much energy demand, there is an opinion that the $1 exchange rate will go down to 1,300 won, and in the opposite case, it may reach 1,500 won. Monetary policies of major countries could not keep pace with the US, which could lead to a strong dollar. Europe, China, and Japan do not have the capacity to raise interest rates to protect the value of their currencies. Korea's weakness in import prices, such as energy, resources, and geopolitical crisis, will continue to weaken the won. Korea, which is highly dependent on China, is the most vulnerable in the process of increasing division between the United States and China during a period of inflation. In addition, if a situation occurs in Taiwan within a year or 3 years, even if it is not an actual conflict, there may be a capital outflow from Korea. If China continues at this rate, The economic size of China will surpass that of the United States in 2030, and its military power will surpass that of the United States in 2045. In 2030, when the size of China's economy exceeds that of the United States, and the United States has a military advantage, no country will be able to resolve the conflict between the United States and China without a military conflict. Over the next decade, the United States is likely to somehow unite with its allies to pressure China to never again challenge for hegemony in the name of security. The next 8 years are the last chance to prevent the allies of China by either institutionally excluded or economically squeezed. Taking this into account, the U.S. could enact several bills, such as the Inflation Reduction Act. The beginning of deglobalization was in 2009, right after the 2008 global financial crisis. The decision made by the United States after the global financial crisis is reshoring, which regulates finance and invites manufacturing companies out of the country. Prior to 2009, the world was divided, and the United States would focus on technology and finance, which is its strength, and impose the rest of the manufactured goods. Therefore, when the U.S. economy improves, other countries also have an economic structure. However, with the onset of reshoring, that link was broken. When the U.S. economy improves, the phenomenon that only the U.S. is good began in 2009. The second deglobalization is the anti-immigrant policy and tariff retaliation against China that began under President Donald Trump. At this time, the seeds of current inflation were shown. Inflation exploded as liquidity was loosened in large number of during Corona, which prevented immigrant workers from entering the United States and imposed tariffs that could encourage inflation of industrial products. Russia's invasion of Ukraine leads to a third deglobalization that affected not only industrial goods but also energy and food. Although the trend of inflation will decline, it is expected that the fairly high level of inflation will be maintained for a long time and will fall slowly. It may take a significant amount of time to meet the Fed's target of 2.0 to 2.5%. Although the Fed is maintaining its tightening stance, if the economy shows signs of a hard landing, it will try to stabilize the market through other signals such as quantitative tightening adjustment.